Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe Simpson. I wanted to come to you today with something a little different. I set out a query to the subscribers to my website and to my YouTube channel, and I wanted to ask these people, hey, what are some of the things that you wish you had known back when you were a growing fisherman or a beginning fisherman? And I didn't really want to categorize this as tips for the beginners because these are tips that people that fish every day could use. So we're going to cover 3 different categories with these different tips. It's going to be lures and baits, tackle and gear, fish habits, and structure. Those are really going to be the 3 major components of these tips that I get from these folks. The first one I got was from Jacob Bunge. I'm going to read these right off the screen. He said, keep it simple, use only a few proven lures. You don't need every color. Eliminate confusion. And S.J. Basson followed up with, hey, the lures catch more fishermen than they catch fish. There's nothing truer than that. The second one I got was from Basson 512. Learn to fish underwater. And he doesn't mean scuba dive. He means not only topwater. Learn to fish baits underwater and get to know the Texas rig. That's an awesome piece of advice. Will Martin came in with a great tip. Learn to fish structure, trees, fall-offs, pockets, etc. Don't blindly cast. Excellent. Bassman 769 said, learn to tie really good knots. The uni knot, the Palomar knot, the Snell knot, the loop knot, the list goes on. You need to learn a good knot. I'm not sure which subscriber LW is, but he says, learn line diameter and casting distance. What line to use and when. That's excellent piece of advice. Jay Pepelak said, learn what fish are doing, water temperature, and figuring out bass habits. So we're going to go through all of these, kind of break it down and talk through this and hopefully give you guys a little bit to work with, especially people who aren't exactly sure what they do when they go bass fishing. If you're like me and you're fishing from the banks, you may not have the advantage to fish some of these different structures and setups the way they fish it from boats. So I can show you some ways we can adapt from the shore. So hang with me. Let's go through some of these and see what we can figure out together. So I'm going to move this stuff around in different orders, and I'm not going to necessarily stay on track with the 1, 2, 3, 4 that I just mentioned before. Before you get started or doing anything with fishing, you want to make sure that you have the right gear, and you want to have your stuff tied on right. You want to make sure that you have your lure connected to the line on the spool, and things are ready to go. Because lures can be very expensive to lose, and it can be really, really a heartbreak to lose a big fish. I can tell you firsthand. So if you have a $10 lure, something like this Thunder Cricket, you don't want to hang that in a tree and break off because you don't know how to tie a good knot. So let's do a couple good knots real quick. I don't even know what this knot is called. It's like a trilene knot, but it's not exactly. I go through once. You could double back and go through twice just to get 2 lines through this hoop. But once you go through, you spin the lure or the hook around 6 or 7 times. A hoop forms above the eye of the bait or the hook, and you just circle back down, go through that little hoop, come back up through the larger hoop that's left behind at the top. Once you go through the larger hoop at the top, you just kind of pull everything together and gather it. You don't cinch it tight, you just gather it down. Lubricate it this time, cinch it down to the eye, and then trim off the tail. This one is a really good performer for me. It's the one my dad taught me, and I've always had great luck with it, and I know it like the back of my hand, so it's my go-to. The next knot is a Palomar knot, and you want to take your line through the hoop of either the hook or lure, and you double it back through, making a double line scenario, and you want to pull that tag line and make sure there's enough slack on either side of that hook to work with. And then you just basically do a once over with the left hand side, kind of like a shoe tie motion. You go over and then back through. Now when you pull it through, you don't cinch it tight. You leave a little bit of slack in that hoop above the hook. Make sure you leave enough line to get down and around and over the hook, because that's part of the way the knot works. And then once you do that, you bring the hoop, the tag line, the main line, pull them all in the same direction, and then start cinching down. And at this time you would lubricate if you're using mono or fluoro. Snip off the tag end and you're good to go. Now the other way you can do this without having to go through and back through is you can just fold the line with plenty of slack. Make sure you get a long enough piece. This is really easy to do with braid, especially small braid. Fold the line in half, just stick it through once, and half the work is already done. And at this point you just do the over-under and then come back through. and then loop over the either lure or hook that you're tying. I have fat fingers, so this isn't that easy for me. And you pull that hoop up to the top, you grab your tag, your main, your hoop, and you kind of start pulling things down, and it'll start cinching and it'll naturally go the way that it needs to go. And at this point, again, you need to lubricate mono or fluoro because you don't want to burn the line. And those are two really good knots that you could use just to get started, and they'll cover pretty much everything you need right away. Okay, now this next one's easier said than done. It's called keeping it simple. And when it comes to baits, it's really, really easy to approach this in a simple way. The first thing you want to think about when you think about baits is color. And really, there's just dark and there's light. Let's take a very popular lure that everybody knows about, and let's talk about them for a second. These are whopper ploppers. Everybody on the planet knows what a whopper plopper is, and there's about 10 or 12 colors of different whopper ploppers that you can buy. But really, when it comes to fishing a topwater lure, or just about any lure there is, there's really just light, and then there's going to be dark. Lures in general are there for one purpose. They're there to emulate some type of creature or fish that the fish like to eat. When you're using one of these square bills, or when you're using one of these swim baits, these swim baits, these square bills, the whopper ploppers, they're all imitating fish. I'm not sure what creature baits and worms necessarily represent to the fish. I would say creature baits are probably going to be something close to emulating a crayfish. This would be a creature bait that would emulate probably a crayfish because of the two legs. And then this is a worm, classic Texas rigged worm, that's probably going to represent just about anything that swims and is wiggly and squirrely on the bottom of the water. Keep it simple, dark and light. You're using baits that emulate fish and creatures, and don't overthink it. Work on casting and technique, and work on recognizing a bite when it's there versus not knowing what they feel like. Don't lose yourself in the sea of colors and variations of all the different lures, because that is truly a situation where the lures usually catch the fishermen more than they catch the fish. Learn to fish underwater. And what I mean by that is not to actually swim under the water and go fishing. What I mean by that is learn to fish baits that go under the water. I know it's really tempting when you first start out to get that immediate gratification of that topwater bite. I'm addicted to it. Believe me, I'm as bad as the next guy. I love the topwater bite. I will always try topwater first and for a long time before I will finally admit that that might not be the bait that works and move to something else. But you need to do it because it can really pay dividends. And if there's one bait, one style to fish underwater that I would recommend that everybody master, before they go too far into their fishing life, is the Texas rig. And this is a really, really excellent way to catch fish. Here you have a plastic worm, and you have a hook that is hooked back into the worm in such a way that it's weedless. It won't snag on the weeds. It's called a Texas rig. And then what you do is you put this on your line and you put a bullet weight on top. There's so many ways to fish the Texas rig that I would say of all the ways to fish a non-topwater lure, that's the first thing you want to learn. 9 months out of the year, you're going to be fishing non-topwater. So you better learn something different. And the Texas rig is probably something you could fish year round. Give that a shot and learn that quickly because that's going to really help your game. The last thing I want to cover is structure and bass habits. I'm going to bulk both of those into one category to talk about at the same time. When we talk about structure, we're not talking about necessarily trees or bushes or rocks or boulders. All those things are structure, but what I'm talking about with structure is I want to address it more with change. When you're looking at structure, you want to adjust your fishing based on depth of water when it goes from deep to shallow, or a bank line that is straight and then all of a sudden it has a cut in, or a pronounced landmass that goes out into the water that causes a little shallow spot, shallow plateaus in the lake, things that you necessarily can't see and you otherwise wouldn't think of it as actual structure. Those things fish relate to when the changes in temperatures, barometric pressures, weather patterns, their breeding, habits, all that stuff is going to vary, and you're going to find fish at different locations on different structure at different times of the year and day and all that stuff. So when you're out fishing and let's say you come up to a pond, it's just a big circle and there's not much going on around the bank. It looks like just a golf course pond. And you think, well, there's not anything happening here. There's really no structure. I'm just going to start casting away. Bass do two things, and two things very good. They eat and they ambush. Bass like to sit where they can't be detected by the bait fish, and they'll come out and they'll smash these fish as they go by, or these creatures as they swim by. So you want to think like a fish, which sounds complicated, but it's actually, you have to think a little simpler in your mindset. You got to think, okay, I want to eat, I want to catch something. Where am I sitting, and how will I get it? The sooner you can start thinking like a fish in that way, you will start actually casting to points and think, oh, this is definitely going to get nailed. And a lot of times, 8 out of 10 times, when you think, oh, I'm going to get hit here, you do. When you're out there fishing, don't just think of trees, bushes, and rocks, although those are good places to cast, definitely. Also think about depth of water, shallow spots, knolls that push out into the water, and fish all the different variations of the change. And you'll start presenting your baits in a way that will get more bites. Okay, so this last one can be very controversial. I'm going to keep it short and simple, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. When it comes to gear and fishing line, I think lighter is better when you're not experienced, because it's just easier to manage on any given reel. I think when you're fishing spinning gear, you should either fish like an 8-pound or a 6-pound mono, or you could go to like a 10 or a 15-pound braid, and those work really well on a 2000 or 3000 series reel. I fish straight braid pretty much 90% of the time. And I know a lot of people fish braid with leaders, or people fish straight fluoro, or straight mono. I'm more of a traditionalist when it comes to fishing line. I like to fish kind of one type of line. I don't like leaders a whole lot. I know they're very advantageous. I know people put leaders on braid and they kind of get the best of both worlds. I either fish braid or I fish mono or fluorocarbon, whatever it is I'm going to be fishing, straight up, all the way through and through. I don't trust my knot capabilities on tying two lines together, even though I've done it several times with great success. It gives me a lack of confidence that I don't want. So when I fish straight lines. So I think when you first start out, I think a good piece of advice is don't lose yourself in trying to do leaders and all these special different knots and all this stuff. If you're going to fish topwater, throw in braid or mono. If you need to fish something that needs to be really stealthy in the water, fish fluorocarbon. If you need to get down a little deeper, fish fluorocarbon. Floating lines, mono and braid. If you need something that's kind of tough, I would go with the braid. So I don't know, you're going to have to play it by ear on that one and decide for yourself what you want to do. But I like a 10 or 15 pound braid on spinning gear, and I like 30-pound braid straight up on fishing rods. And knowing what line works well on what reel will help your casting, your accuracy, all those things. So fishing line does matter, but that's about all I'm going to say about that. I'm sure I'm going to get quite a few comments about opinions, but anyway, you guys take care. That's about all we have for today. Thanks for hanging in there for all these tips. Hope it helps some of you who aren't, super great fishermen and still learning, because I know in the last 4 or 5 years, all this stuff I've learned through YouTube and other videos from other people. So I appreciate you guys coming to my channel and watching. Please subscribe, like, all that good stuff, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good afternoon and a good weekend. Later.